It's only 10 to 6, but the clocks have changed. The people living on the boats have got lights. That's Henri from Amsterdam, 1922. I have to be careful not to be run over by a cyclist. And there's this place. That's that stripy boat. Oh, Janet. There was a lot in your videos. I remembered when I was a kid, well, young. I guess younger than you. No, older. When I started studying maths, I was doing this maths foundation course. And I had managed to get tech working on my computer, and there was this thing I wanted to prove about the sums of the digits of multiples of 9 are always multiples of 9, and so that goes on forever, doesn't it? Here, look at this. It's like a boat garden. It's part of the bank that's the garden that kind of belongs to that boat. Isn't it pretty? So I was doing this and proved this theorem about why that's true, and typed it all up in LaTeX. It came to about a page of maths, but with summations and things, and I loved the way it looked. I just liked to see the kind of print and the forms of it, and the fact that they actually meant something, and the fact that I knew what it meant because I had written it. But it's kind of trivial, really. A real mathematician just scribbles it on a piece of paper. Hello.
Hey, thank you.
It's okay. Wow, she's brave. Walking alone along this miserable place in the dark. And a real mathematician just scribbles it down on a napkin and goes on to think about something else. I'm kind of behind in maths, I really am. I'm not good at it. My brain's too small. It's all designed by people who are able to handle far more complexity than my little brain can handle. And that's why people like me just don't do very well at maths. But when I got to Bolivia and had some time to think about it and thought about how it all starts and how much simpler things can be when you prove theorems in the right order. And the category theorists know this because they do very, very short proofs of things which in the classical literature and the historic development of maths some of these things took ages to prove, and reams of pieces of paper. But category theory seems to give people a way of organizing these things so that they can use properties of categories and make categories out of other categories, and then the proofs can be done of these quite difficult theorems can be done by short-circuiting an awful lot of stuff, which is really just to do with drilling down, unwinding definitions far enough until they're at a level where there are theorems about them, and you can actually move forward with your proof, and then you kind of wind the definitions up at the end. But what I did when I heard, roughly speaking, what category theory was about, I thought, oh, really what I want is a thing that builds up kind of minimalist examples of each category. Because it seemed to me that to prove something in category theory, you only need to prove it for the kind of simplest object for which it is true. And then it will also hold for all the other more complicated objects for which it is true. And so I come across this idea of taking the axiomatization, because category theory is not that much more abstract than abstract algebra. So there are these basic axioms, and they apply to you can apply category theory to itself. The set of morphisms is a set, and the set of objects in a category is a set. So it kind of lends itself to talking about itself. So that made me think that enumerating these objects, constructing them from their simplest parts, and then using those parts to build bigger parts, and putting those bigger parts into bigger parts, and so on and so forth, would kind of unravel a structure. I thought it did. I really thought it did. I've got to stop. I around the 13th or 14th of February 2010, I very carefully constructed this kind of thing, which was like an inner model it was a kind of generative structure for an inner model. Of whatever you could call, of any sort of thing you could call a category. And according to these basic axioms, which are that it has a left and a right inverse, and that it's associative and the composition, and the most amazing, I built this system on paper. I just went through 3 stages of interpretation and reinterpretation, and in some way at each stage I was able to rewrite the previous stage using the symbols of the new stage. So I had 3 different languages. I think the first was a language of just A and B. That was the only thing in the language. And from that I created some sort of unit type and a pair type, which you can think of as points and paths. And then the next stage was to create a kind of function type, which was capable of, really all it was a set of permutations, because any permutation can be made of by composing together a series of swaps. So all the functions in my system were bijections. So then the next stage was to be able to do meaningful things with these functions, which are actually bijections. I kind of did something which preserved the bijection underneath, but which associated to each element in the image of the function, that is the set to which the function maps, not the set from which it maps things. In the image I had 2 things. I always had pairs. The images were always pairs, and they were pairs consisting of the first thing and something else, and that allow you to kind of group together distinct elements in the image under this bijection. You could group together distinct elements, and that I felt gave me a kind of model discrete probability space, and then I used that in a 3rd stage, and I rewrote all the others, and then for some reason at this 3rd level it closed, and I could see that there was nothing else to do. There were no more reinterpretations that you had to do, and there were no more languages, because nothing new would appear. And at this 3rd stage I had this kind of lambda-like notation with arbitrary arguments which could be substituted, and then I started playing with that model, that Tarski language, which is its own truth predicate thing, 1.5 pages that I wrote a few months before, and I found a notation that simplified it a little bit, and all it was little binary trees, and the leaves of the trees were always places where you could make a substitution of another binary tree, and you could go on doing this. So another part of this 3-stage construction was that at each stage there was something new that needed to be done that didn't need to be done in the stage before. So because at the beginning I didn't have a notion of function, I didn't have a notion of composition, and because of that I only had to do the composition notion at the last stage, and that was where the associativity had to come in. So I think that the kind of closure condition that I spotted was just that now I have got the characterization of all the axioms, and maybe that was the sense in which it was closed, and that I knew that after that anything you wanted to do would be in there. With some sense be made of the objects below. So in the last few days, when I've been looking at this homotopy hypothesis about infinity groupoids, these groupoids come in stages. There's one for each natural number. So you have 1 groupoids, 2 groupoids, 3 groupoids, and so on. So it all seems to kind of work with that homotopy type theory idea, and maybe this ADE phenomena is part of the story. Well, it surely is, because ideals have something to do with adjoints. And you might ask, why don't I get out a piece of paper and start writing this down? Yeah, the reason I don't do that is because I know from experience that when you do that, it's very easy to get lost in diversions, unless you have some very clear structural rules to focus your attention, because this business of representation in mathematics is so kind of open-ended. that's why it was interesting to hear that, to see John Byers' paper. John Byers' talk was the most amazingly clear slides. They're actually notes, but they're printed big like slides about the homotopy hypothesis. But when you look at the statement of it, that the infinity groupoids are a space, it just made me think, oh well, why don't you, instead of trying to prove the homotopy hypothesis outright, why don't you just try and prove that with probability 1 the infinity groupoids form a space, and use one of these limits, one of these probability limits. It doesn't have to be probability 1. There are all sorts of other ones, like almost surely, or other things. Can't remember them all. There are various forms, some of which are weaker than others. But why not switch from logic to probability? Because that was in the original plan, right? For Boolean algebra, at any rate. George Boole was trying to formulate the laws of thought, and that wasn't just what we call Boolean logic. That was Boolean algebra as applied to both sets, and in which case you get probability spaces and probabilities, and logical expressions, in which case you get truth values and logical expressions. And so in some of my mad rants that I wrote in Bolivia, I talked about interpreting types as probabilities. But it seems to me that one way of closing off that homotopy hypothesis might be to go to probabilistic reasoning, but it would be a very, very sparse kind of probability, because I think the only probabilities you would have are would be of the form n over n minus 1 for some very large n. That is, these probabilities would all stack up, leaving just one unproved statement, or one unprovable statement. And you don't hear discussions of this in discussions about Gödel's completeness theorems, but Gödel incompleteness theorems. But in the first incompleteness theorem, it's basically a conditional. If a logical system is complete, then it's inconsistent, and if it's consistent, then it's incomplete. So, in other words, if it's consistent, then there are one or more theorems that it can't prove, and it might just be one theorem that it can't prove, which is the one that says that it's inconsistent, because if you could prove that, it wouldn't be consistent. So there seems to be a way, if you did that with logic, there seems to be a way to resolve that question, whether a system is consistent or incomplete. And later I thought that might be good for... There's an animal in the water, just splashed. Here's another boat. I've got all the way to the bridge. In computer security, I was thinking about the same thing again. You could have an idea of something being verifiably secure, but not verified secure. It would be something that you approach asymptotically. Maybe by simulating the simulations in the simulations and so on and so forth. So the longer you can wait, the more of the model you can check. So it's kind of like runtime model checking. They've got a big room with a huge window that looks out over the river and the fields. But then it's very carefully arranged so that you can't look right into the house from most places along here. So there's my long ramble about the foundations of mathematics and computer science. I really liked Toby's guided meditations, they're great. The second one worked much better than the first. The first one I just cracked up laughing as soon as she talked about Isaac Newton and the foundations of physics. And I imagined us all in a bucket being swung around somebody's head. I wish this could come out. It's quite nice. It's a view under the bridge of the boats of the Cannes Conservancy, all lit up by the pub across the river. And they're all yellow and red and white, and no, you can't see anything. We'll go up onto the bridge and maybe you can see a bit of it. Sabina did a video today about this new type of tiling that looks interesting. And she mentioned in it, there's the pub. Oh. She mentioned something about social media and discussing things, and I didn't understand it. Something about boxes with soft edges. I have no idea. Yeah, you still can't see them. I need a better camera. It's 30 minutes video, I better stop there.